Good morning, everyone. Well, technically good morning. I think it's the morning, but from wherever you are, happy Thursday. Thank you guys for joining us on our monthly Azure Infrastructure and Management partner call. Before we get going, just want to do a quick sound check. So in the messages tab, if you guys don't mind typing in your favorite childhood superhero, if you can hear me, that would be phenomenal. Yes. Loving the answers. The Tick, there's a new one. Haven't heard that in a while. Perfect. Well, good to know that audio is working well. So thank you guys for that. Love the answers coming in. This is phenomenal. I have more comics to read now. Perfect. So now that audio is working, just want to again thank you guys for joining us this Thursday. And before I hand it over and do all the logisticals, we do have a few polling questions to ask. So as you guys will very quickly see in your panel in the Event Builder platform, there'll be some survey questions popping up. So if you guys don't mind answering those real quickly, I'll give you guys a few seconds for each. That would be wonderful. And one more question coming in. Perfect. Well, thank you guys for answering those questions for us. We really do appreciate it. And we'll actually have a small survey kind of coming at the end as well after the stream ends. But without further ado, I just want to introduce our special guest today is Jamie Schmidtke, who is our ExpressRoute specialist for Microsoft North America. And he will be taking over the call shortly. But before that, just want to do a few logistical pieces to this call, and that this call is recorded. So if you have any issues with your name and or email potentially popping up depending on questions and things of that nature, please drop off the call now, as it again is recorded, but we will be posting these slides in this recording to our Yammer page and our YouTube channel as well. So if you want to gain access to this information in this presentation later, it will be available to you as well. Other than that, if you guys have any questions, just type those into the messages panel and we'll get those in on our back end and we'll ask those as we go along the call. And if you have any audio issues as well, just kind of type those in and I'll help you out in the back end and get that all situated for you guys. Without further ado, Jamie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Parker, and thanks everybody. And as Parker was saying, I'm Jamie Schmidtke. I'm based in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm on the ExpressRoute Partner Management team here at Microsoft. But it's not strictly just to partners. You know, I work very closely with all of our customers globally around ExpressRoute network connectivity into the Microsoft cloud. And we also have a big focus on our connectivity providers, which we'll talk a little bit about later, and also looking to expand our systems integrator partnerships. And I'm hoping this call today will give you an introduction to what ExpressRoute is, what it's all about, how the service functions, the opportunity that is available to our partner community to be able to service customers and getting the proper connectivity to the Microsoft cloud, and how we could work together. So if we look at the big network picture, right, within the Azure Virtual Network, we really have the concept of, bring your own network to the Microsoft cloud, right, sending your own RFC 1918 address space within infrastructure as a service. Your own, segmentation strategies, subnets. You have full control of the routes and security groups, usually define routing or network security groups, access control lists, things like that. And we're constantly growing the list of network virtual appliances, and there's actually some announcements that occurred at our Microsoft Ignite conference here a few months ago that's really going to help the network virtual appliance vendors, expand their capabilities like multiple NICs and multiple IPs on a single NIC, multiple MAC addresses, things like that. So we're really excited about what the future has in store for Azure networking, and how it's going to enable customers to be able to really leverage the Microsoft Cloud as if they're using their own data center. So from a front end access perspective, as part of Azure networking, obviously we have the ability to look at internet address or internet access. You could reserve public IP addresses coming from Azure into the internet, and also we have a number of different services that could help really solidify customers' network strategy within the public cloud, like load balancing, DNS services, DDoS protections, and things like that. And then how do we connect into this, which is what we're going to be getting into today. There's a couple different options, and depending on which services that you're consuming from Microsoft. But of course, there's internet connectivity in the form of encrypted traffic to any of the platform services, or leveraging site-to-site VPN gateways to infrastructure as a service offerings like your virtual machines and virtual networks, and of course ExpressRoute, which is what we're here to talk about today. So what is ExpressRoute exactly? So ExpressRoute is essentially the ability to have customers' private networks connect into the Microsoft Cloud. So when our strategy around this, and when we're looking at how customers can consume cloud services, you're only as good as how your network connection, right? And as Yusuf Khalidi likes to say, who's the CVP of Azure Networking here at Microsoft, if you don't have a global class network, you don't really have a global class cloud. So the way that we have our model structured is we work very closely with the partner community, which we'll talk about who those partners are here in a little bit from a connectivity perspective. So we've got the customers network that you see here in the left-hand portion of the slide, and those customers already have existing MPLS providers, AT&T, Verizon, Level 3, and the list goes on and on depending on what part of the world you're in, or which part of a given country you're in. And we've established relationships with a lot of those providers to be able to have connectivity into Microsoft. So when you're looking at the typical deployment of an MPLS node, you're thinking maybe 60, 90, 120 days. But in a lot of cases, we've done substantial amount of work with a lot of these providers to make it a lot faster in terms of being able to turn up these connections. So when the partners have their partner edge already pre-configured with the Microsoft edge, it really comes down to a question of what are these customers connecting to. And with ExpressRoute, we have 3 different routing domains that we could service connections into. The bottom here in the bottom right is the Azure Private Peering, which is infrastructure as a service offerings like your virtual machines, your virtual networks. The middle cloud here, the purple one, that's the Azure Public Peering, which is all the platform as a service offering like SQL Azure, blob storage, machine learning, things like that you would access over the internet. And then finally here on the top is the Microsoft Peering, which is the software as a service offerings like Office 365, Skype for Business Online, Exchange, SharePoint, CRM Online is another one. These type of offerings travel over this Microsoft peering. So, when talking to customers and formulating a connection strategy, it really starts in what their workloads are, because that'll dictate, what they need to configure with their providers, and communicating with those providers early and often to be able to make sure that one, we're setting up the locations correctly, and 2, that we're setting up the virtual connections correctly depending on which routing domain is required from that customer. So in terms of how the providers connect to us, there's really 3 different ways. And starting from the left and moving to the right, there's the Cloud Exchange co-location model, where a customer could have floor space, and in some cases they do get what's called a remote port into this Cloud Exchange provider's set of switches that actually connect directly to the ExpressRoute routers. So whether it's through another provider, maybe a provider that doesn't have direct connectivity to us, that has connection into one of these cloud exchanges, or the customer directly we could be able to service up these virtual connections to the Microsoft Cloud via our Cloud Exchange providers. And examples of that would be people like Equinix, CoreSite, Cologix, Megaport, NextDC, Interaction, and the list is constantly growing. So we're looking to not only offer up the Cloud Exchange colocation side of it, but also from a network service provider side, we get into the rest of these connection models, which you see here on the middle and right-hand portion of the screen. So we've got a point-to-point Ethernet connection model, which is really just a layer 2 connection. So we've got some providers like level 3 that could offer up layer 2 connectivity and Ethernet based connection into one of our ExpressRoute locations, and then the customer would be responsible, or the partner that they're working with, be responsible for setting up those layer 3 configurations based on which routing domains that they're connecting to, which is of course based on the services that they're leveraging in the Microsoft Cloud. And finally here, this any-to-any connection, or IPVPN connection, is really tied to partners like AT&T and their NetBond offering, or Verizon and their Secure Cloud Interconnect. Level 3 also has an IPVPN option, and we're adding more partners that are having this capability. So, when you looked at customers' existing MPLS networks, and you could go into a specific portal and logically configure connectivity, which would enable the Microsoft Cloud just to be seen as another node on the customer's existing MPLS network. And all three of these connection models really provide that, but from an any-to-any perspective, it really automatically incorporates the Microsoft Cloud into their existing MPLS mesh, as opposed to having separate specific connections regarding either a site-to-site and a layer 2 perspective, or a point-to-point rather, and the Cloud Exchange co-location side of it. So from a partner standpoint, this list is constantly growing, and we've developed deep relationships with these partners globally, in a lot of cases in multiple locations. So if you look at this list and you're looking at your customers that you service, maybe they might not be on this list, but remember, as I mentioned in the previous slide, we could always connect in through one of our Cloud Exchange partners. So whether it's a CoreSite or an Equinix or even a Megaport, if we don't have an established relationship with that carrier provider, chances are we have talked to them. So feel free to reach out to someone like myself to be able to give you the landscape and what the status is with that given partner, and then formulate a strategy for that customer. But we also have a number of contacts over at these customers where we have dedicated distribution lists to be able to communicate with the people that manage the cloud connectivity business. So as you can see, there are a number of these companies are large, global, multinational companies, and in some cases, a given person within that company might not really have a deep understanding of the cloud connectivity offering that they have, or how it functions, or what the proper strategy is. And that's where resources like myself will be able to assist you all in making sure that you're connected with the right folks, and we're putting the customers in a position to be successful. And this list you'll see in our ExpressRoute documentation site in the very near future is going to be expanded quite a bit here, with some new logos, some new names, and some new contacts to be able to reach out to make sure that customers are getting the connectivity they need to the Microsoft Cloud. So let's talk about those locations that I mentioned earlier. So we've got a pretty vast array of locations globally for our customers to consume. You can see quite a bit here in North America with the addition of our Canadian locations in Toronto and Montreal, and there's actually one missing here, which is Quebec City for the Canadian cloud. And then in the U.S., we're looking to take what we have in terms of existing locations and expand on that. So you're going to be seeing announcements, which I can't disclose right now, but announcements here in the very near future with net new ExpressRoute locations, where a lot of the partners that you saw on the previous slide will have connectivity to as well. One thing I want to note is there is a difference between what we call the commercial ExpressRoute connection locations and the national cloud locations. So with the United States, for instance, we've got government cloud access, which would be in New York, Washington, D.C., and Chicago. And within this national cloud, or the Gov Cloud as is known in the U.S., Each one of these locations is actually connected to a separate set of routers. So we have a certain autonomous system name or number for the ExpressRoute commercial side of the house, and then we've got a separate one for the government-based ExpressRoute routers. So each one of those partners that you see listed on our documentation site, like AT&T, Verizon, Level 3, Equinix, that connect into our government-based clouds, they actually have separate connections into a separate set of routers, and that's really for, the GovCloud compliance piece. So we're also looking to expand those locations out into the West Coast as well, which, we'll soon be announcing, where they are and what the partners are that will be servicing them. But the same thing goes for these other national clouds, like China, for instance, out of Shanghai and Beijing, in Germany, within Berlin and Frankfurt. So within each one of these clouds, they're all isolated because they're on separate networks. So one ExpressRoute location within this government cloud, ExpressRoute connection can communicate with any of the GovCloud data centers in the United States. And the same thing goes for within Germany. So ExpressRoute connection in Frankfurt can communicate with any of the German-based data centers that we have. And then the same goes for China as well. Now, on the flip side, if you look at it from a commercial standpoint, any one of these locations that we have here on the map in the orange can communicate within their own geopolitical region with every single data center that we have. And that's for the standard circuit. Now we've got this thing we'll talk about a little bit later called the premium add-on, which allows all of these ExpressRoute locations to communicate with any data center globally. So remember, from a commercial standpoint, you could communicate, let's say, within North America with an ExpressRoute standard circuit in any one of these locations to any of the data centers in North America. And then, if you want to connectivity to, let's say, from North America to Europe or North America to Asia, you would need to enable that premium add-on to get the global routing tables for those other locations. So these Meet Me sites, we talked about them a little bit, and like I said, the list is ever growing. We try to give our partner community, or really our customer community as well, a heads up on what's coming down the road. So you can see an example where you see these pluses that are listed on our website, like with Montreal, Quebec City. Those sites are coming soon, and we're basically in a final testing phases for those locations. So we try to keep the items that are listed on the website, very close proximity to when the site will actually become generally available. So if there's questions around, different locations that you might not see on the website, or maybe a coming soon location, and you would like to learn more information about which partners and, what other locations might be on the horizon for a given opportunity with one of your customers, feel free to reach out to me or any number of our colleagues globally to be able to get you that information. And as I was mentioning earlier, you can see here on the left-hand portion of the slide, the standard SKU gets you connectivity within your own geopolitical region, and then the premium SKU gets you connectivity to all regions globally, excluding the national clouds, of course. And mentioned here, we saw that the Azure regions that are listed in terms of the national clouds and their corresponding ExpressRoute locations. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be expanding those pretty heavily here in the near future. So this premium SKU that we have with ExpressRoute, it gets you a couple things outside of what I mentioned with global connectivity. It gets you more routes to be able to leverage in private peering. So if a customer has up to 10,000 routes, up from 4,000 with the standard circuit, you'd be able to advertise those routes into the Azure private peering with the premium add-on. You can connect to more virtual networks. So it's a tiered model with the virtual networks. So with each ExpressRoute circuit, you can link up to 10 virtual networks, and then it's tiered and it's documented on our ExpressRoute documentation page based on bandwidth. So as you go up in bandwidth from 50 meg up to 10 gig, the corresponding VNets that you can link to that circuit will increase with the premium add-on. And finally, if you're looking to gain access to Office 365 or CRM Online over the Microsoft peering, assuming you get approval for that from the Office product team, then you would need to have the premium add-on enabled to be able to leverage those services over ExpressRoute. And the reason for that is really the global connectivity benefit that you get when using ExpressRoute Premium, because Office 365 and CRM Online are globally available multi-tenant services. So we need those global routing tables to be able to ensure that customers get the appropriate connectivity wherever they may be. So let's talk about pricing a little bit. I mentioned a little bit of the tiering of the bandwidth. So we've got two billing models with ExpressRoute. We've got the metered data plan and the unlimited data plan. So the metered data plan includes all traffic going into the Microsoft Cloud, and is essentially a port charge, which you see here on the left-hand side of the screen. So you're paying, for, let's say, for a 50 meg connection, $55 a month for a port charge, and then any data that is leaving the Microsoft Cloud back to on-premise is metered at a 2.5 cents per gigabyte US dollars for Zone 1. So you'll see on the bottom half of this graphic here that you'll look at the different pricing models for Zone 1, Zone 2, and Zone 3. So Zone 1 is North America, Zone 2 is in Europe, Zone 2 is Asia Pacific, and Zone 3 is South America, which is essentially Brazil. So these different pricing structures is only for the billing side. So when looking at maybe a multinational company that wants to set up a meter connection in Asia compared to North America or Europe, then they would be looking at this Zone 2 meter, which is 5 cents per gigabyte egress. And then you've got the corresponding premium add-on costs associated with each level of bandwidth that you have here. And then likewise on the unlimited side, all the charges that are built into each one of these bandwidth tiers on the unlimited SKUs are for both ingress and egress traffic. So this allows our SI partners to be consultative here, where you're looking at the specific workloads that customers are consuming within the Microsoft Cloud, and then you could dictate which plan would best suit them. So if they're using Azure Backup or blob storage, and they're sending a ton of data from on-premise into Azure, then the meter connection makes a lot of sense. If they have workloads that are sending a lot of data back to on-prem, whether it's ETL transactions, with big data, or like Office 365, for instance, then the unlimited plan tends to make more sense. Now, the break-even point, you might be thinking, between the metered plan and the unlimited plan is around 60% utilization of the circuit, and that'll differ a couple percentage points depending on which size of the circuit is. But the rule of thumb is around 60% utilization on that egress traffic is where the break-even point is to go to unlimited from a metered connection.
Hey, Jamie, I've got a quick question, actually.
Sure.
And someone asked, is ExpressRoute on CSP yet?
Yes, it is. So ExpressRoute is fully supported on CSP. One thing to note about CSP is that as a partner, each customer needs to have their own ExpressRoute circuit. So while from a provider standpoint, providers could set up these big pipes and be able to carve it up logically to be able to facilitate those virtual connections to the Microsoft Cloud, each one of the customers that you would be managing within a CSP subscription needs to have their own ExpressRoute circuit that's in their own Azure subscription. So that's what we can't do is have one partner, CSP partner, set up a 10 gig ExpressRoute circuit and share that amongst multiple customers, mostly because of the fact of the traffic being able to be seen by those different customers. So the way that the billing is structured with CSP, and the way that we want the networks architected to have segregation and work within the system, we need to have each one of those customers set up their own ExpressRoute circuit, or have the CSP partner set up their own ExpressRoute circuit in their own subscription that they're managing. Were there any other questions around CSP?
Nope, that's all.
Perfect. So let's talk about the setup. So we talked a little bit about what's involved with the different routing domains, and we'll talk a little bit about the innards of what ExpressRoute is, in terms of the provider routers and the Microsoft routers. So as I mentioned earlier, each connectivity partner that we have sets up virtual connections or physical connections into our Microsoft ExpressRoute routers, and then within that we actually have two redundant paths. And the reason for that is we have a SLA for availability at 99.95%. And, the way we're able to offer this is, as Microsoft, we actually provision 2 paths for each customer, or each ExpressRoute circuit rather. And each one of those paths is actually active. So we provision in an active fashion. Not all providers can support that. At minimum, they would support an active-passive configuration. But all this is done logically. So a typical question we get is, well, compared to some other cloud providers, connectivity methods, Microsoft requires, 2 connections. And that is true, but it's not true in the sense that we require 2 physical connections. So this is all done at the virtual level. So we actually have a FAQ question that's published on our Azure documentation site that goes through kind of the diagram of what that looks like. So, from a layer 2 perspective, if a customer gets one circuit into a Cloud Exchange location and they have one physical fiber that's going from their location to that Cloud Exchange location, that could get broken up into 2 virtual paths that you see here. So, if you run into situations where customers are like, well, it's twice the cost because I need to have, 2 MPLS circuits and 2 sets of routers, that's not the case. So I just want to make sure that's abundantly clear because we run into that every once in a while. So as I mentioned, each one of these paths is active, and you can see here the BGP sessions are set up for each one of these routing domains. Now, you could have a combination of these routing domains, or you could have just one, or all 3. It's really dependent on what the customer is consuming. There's not a requirement to have one because you have another. It's really dependent on what the workloads are, whether it's infrastructure as a service in Azure, platform offerings within Azure, or Office 365 or CRM Online. So let's talk about each peering here for a little bit. So we'll talk about the Azure Private Peering. So when customers look to set up Azure Private Peering, the first thing they need to have is a virtual network, or a VNet within Azure. And then those VNets would actually get connected to an ExpressRoute gateway, which would link to that ExpressRoute circuit going back to the customer's network. And we have bi-directional connections going back and forth between the customer's infrastructure as a service tenant and their own network. And it could be any RFC 1918 address space that they would like to use within those VNets. Now, we could force tunnel traffic back into the customer's network. So in the event that they would rather use their own intrusion detection systems, or web filters, or firewalls on-prem, we could certainly provide that as well for all those networks that are in the Microsoft Cloud, and also set up DMZ configurations for cross-premise traffic. So really, if you look at this, as I mentioned, I think on the onslaught, we're really taking a lot of the fundamental security benefits that customers would take advantage of on-prem, and being able to implement them into the Microsoft Cloud and leverage ExpressRoute for that private connectivity. So let's say we've got another virtual network that the customer has created within Azure, and perhaps it might even be in a separate Azure region. We could link that VNet to another gateway, which could also link to the ExpressRoute circuit. So it's a one-to-many mapping in terms of gateways and ExpressRoute circuits. And this is how customers have actually put together redundancy strategies, not just within the ExpressRoute circuit, which is built in, but also geographically. So, having an ExpressRoute circuit in the East Coast U.S. and also in the West Coast U.S., for an example, and then you could use routing tricks like AS-path prepending to be able to influence routing depending on where the traffic is originating from on the customer's network. So then that way, in the event that a failure may happen in a given ExpressRoute location, or the whole East Coast is wiped out for whatever reason, customers can still communicate through their MPLS network to that VNet via the ExpressRoute circuit that was created in the West Coast U.S. So that's something that we give flexibility to our customers to be able to to configure, not only being able to share geo redundancy, but also take advantage of the bandwidth for each ExpressRoute circuit in any given location.
Hey, Jamie, we got a quick question just to interject for a second, and it might step you back a second, but someone asked, are the 2 virtual paths active-passive or active-active?
They are active-active from Microsoft. So when customers are communicating with their connectivity providers, they need to ask if they support active-active connectivity into ExpressRoute. A lot of them support active-passive. There's some that support active-active. And, just to let you guys know, we don't guarantee the bursting on that circuit, but theoretically, you're getting, two, let's say on a 1 gig circuit, you're getting 2 1 gig paths, and you could theoretically burst up to potentially 2 gigs. And another thing I'll say to that is, what we don't want to instruct customers to do is rely on that. So we have run into situations, let's say, where a customer is getting a 3 gig connection from their provider, and the way our bandwidth tiering works, it goes from 1 gig to 2 gig to 5 gig. So you're kind of in that middle ground, and what we don't want to happen is have the customer set up a 2 gig ExpressRoute circuit and rely on that bursting capabilities, because that's not guaranteed. What we would rather recommend is the customer over-provision ExpressRoute to be at a 5 gig level to take advantage of the 3 gig that they're getting from their provider. And in some cases, even on the lower bandwidth tiers, where we're talking about like a 50 meg connection, there are some providers that offer up 10 meg connectivity into ExpressRoute, but the minimum for us is 50 meg. Now, it works just fine. There's no issues there. But, it's not something that should be a showstopper if, the customer only wants 10 meg from their provider. And to be honest, the pricing for the 50 meg option that we have today is cheaper than what we had with the 10 meg option some time ago. I hope that answers the question, Parker. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's perfect. Keep going.
Cool. So to wrap up the Azure private peering discussion, you see here in the last bullet point, the site-to-site VPN can also be used as a backup. Now, a caveat with that is, the route-based site-to-site VPN is the only one today that could support, coexistence and failover with ExpressRoute. Now, customers can have the, BGP-based or the dynamic site-to-site VPN that was released not too long ago in coexistence with an ExpressRoute circuit, but the failover capabilities and having that traffic go from ExpressRoute automatically over to the site-to-site VPN is not available just yet. It's something that's on our roadmap and we're working on. But that's the one thing to be careful of. If a customer sets up that BGP-based site-to-site VPN and they have the expectation of having a failover with ExpressRoute, they're going to have to switch that over to the route-based VPN. So the VNet and the gateway sizing are important. So the gateway subnet is a /28 or a /27, and it needs to be a standard or high performance gateway. We actually announced the availability of an ultra performance gateway because previously the cap on the high performance gateway was 2 gigs worth of throughput over Azure private peering. And with the ultra performance gateway, we're pushing that up to 10 gig of traffic. So if you've got customers that have high bandwidth needs within infrastructure as a service, and they need to go above 2 gigs, that used to be a showstopper where we had to do some tricks around setting up multiple ExpressRoute circuits to be able to kind of spread the bandwidth around. But with the ultra performance gateway now, that issue should be resolved. So let's talk about the Azure public peering. So the Azure public peering is used to access those platform as a service or PaaS offerings, right? Like blob storage, machine learning, Azure Site Recovery, SQL Azure, all those services that you would normally just access over the internet, over SSL or TLS. And one thing I want to make clear, it's a unidirectional connection. So for this peering, all traffic is initiated from the customer's network. There's no traffic coming from the Azure platform services that will initiate a connection within the customer's network. And for that reason, we set up a NAT pool to be able to translate those IPs coming from the customer's internal network into a public IP, which is what is used to configure the public peering to communicate with these public services. So when setting up an ExpressRoute circuit for Azure public peering, you need public IP address space in the form of a /29 that will get broken up into 2 /30s for each one of our redundant paths, and a public ASN as well. And in some cases, customers might not be of the size, or they might not have available public IP address space to dedicate to the BGP sessions that they would set up for the Azure public peering. And a number of our providers do offer that, where they can leverage their public IP address space, their IPv4 space, to be able to communicate with the Azure Public Services. But just to let you guys know, there is an automatic checking and validation process that we do on the Microsoft side to ensure that the customers' networks that they're communicating with us on are indeed theirs. So we look at the ASN that the customer inputs into the public peering configuration, and we go through a check and look at the registries that are out there, like for instance Aaron, to verify that the customer who owns that subscription is indeed using their own private public IP address space to communicate with our public services. Now, in the event that a provider is allowing the customer to use their public IP address space, obviously that automated validation check would fail. So it's really simple for the customer to be able to submit a free support ticket to be able to get routed to the Azure networking team, requesting that the ASN that they provided in the public IP address space that they provided can get manually validated in order for them to set up the Azure public peering. So the Microsoft peering from an IP address standpoint is operating in a very similar way, where you need public IP address space in the form of /29. They'll get broken out into 2/30s, and that validation process that I just went through also applies for the Microsoft peering, because remember, with the services like Office 365 and CRM Online, those are publicly available services. But some of the other caveats with the Microsoft peering is, from a technology standpoint, is that the premium add-on is required, and that's because these are globally available services that span multiple data centers. And as opposed to the Azure public peering, you can't necessarily dictate specifically which data center that your resources are going to be housed in. So this is why that premium add-on is required. So you look at the ability to have quality of service support for Skype for Business. That's one thing that a lot of customers are taking advantage of, where they want to be able to tag that traffic. And we've got specific markings and DSCP values that customers would need to configure their routers with to be able to have our routers recognize the Skype traffic and be able to prioritize that accordingly. So that's all documented on our ExpressRoute documentation site, and you can look at the specific markings and what type of traffic is prioritized, like voice and video and interactive, SIP signaling and things like that. Now with the Microsoft peering, even though you'd be traveling over a private connection with ExpressRoute, the internet is still required. Now remember, I mentioned that this is a globally available multi-tenant service, and the way that our DNS and content delivery network infrastructure is set up, we still need the public internet because we have things like geolocation services with DNS. The CDN network is vast and globally available and works directly with our internet peering partners that we have out there. So when customers look at setting up Microsoft peering for Office 365, they need to make sure that they're taking into account that public internet is still a requirement to do things like DNS lookups or pull down Pro Plus client downloads. So in some of these cases, what we've seen is customers run into asymmetric routing issues, where a packet might be going over ExpressRoute and then trying to return over the internet, or vice versa. And with stateful firewalls, that would obviously cause packets to be dropped. And that, along with some other situations where customers think that this is a security solution for Office 365, that being ExpressRoute, that's certainly not the case. And they're using the same edge servers that they're looking up in DNS over the public internet here, in connecting over ExpressRoute, as they would connect to those edge servers over the public internet. And also performance has been an issue in some cases too, where without the proper planning, customers have actually degraded performance, where they've introduced latency due to the ExpressRoute locations they've selected in conjunction with where their users are located and where their data is housed from a geopolitical region standpoint. So that's why we kind of came out with guidance back in May that Office 365 can only be used with ExpressRoute in certain scenarios. So we're looking at customers that have compliance or regulatory requirements around private networking, or if they're looking at Skype for Business and they go through a network assessment and it's proven that their internet connectivity is just not going to cut it to be able to deliver the Skype service, then we'll look to ExpressRoute as a solution for that. So if you've run into customers where they have some of these preconceived notions about enhanced security or enhanced performance, or they think that ExpressRoute would be a silver bullet for, like, SharePoint performance issues or Exchange issues, it's not going to be that silver bullet. And what we've seen in our experience over the last year or so is that, you look at, maybe different components within their Office 365 tenant, or how they have things configured with like proxy servers or things like that, to see if where the bottleneck is, because what we don't want to do is have them go through the process of engaging connectivity partners, setting up ExpressRoute and, paying for this service, premium service, and then it not having any net effect on either their, security or performance requirements. So that's one thing I want to make sure is clear on this call is, if we run into one of the scenarios of either compliance or regulatory requirements, or customer's internet is so poor that it can't deliver the Skype service, then we'll work with the Microsoft account teams for that given customer to be able to put the case forward to the Office product team and gain approval for that. And once that happens, we would work in conjunction with the customer, the connectivity provider, and in a lot of cases the SI partner, to make sure that we've put together this comprehensive plan to implement this service for Office 365. And our Office product team members have been great about putting together some public-facing documentation, which we could post into the Yammer group after this call, and then you could see things to look out for in our experiences, what we've seen with other customers, and how to properly plan the implementation from start to finish to ensure success of the customer that it gets approved to use this service. One last thing around the Microsoft peering, unlike the Azure public peering, there's bi-directional connections. So this kind of goes to what's needed in terms of planning. So we need to set up NAT pools and have source netting configured to be able to have the traffic from Office 365 initiate over to the customer's network. So that's some other parts of the steps in regards to the planning process that's needed, and we've documented quite a bit of this on the public documentation site. And if we go down the approval path and gain that, we've got resources to bear to be able to work with you guys hand in hand to make sure that this is a success. So the planning for deployment, and this goes for ExpressRoute all up. Particularly with Azure, choose your Microsoft data center, your ExpressRoute connectivity partner, get them engaged as early as possible. Talk about the network on the front end, and it can be done in parallel, right? Customers can set up site-to-site VPNs to get familiar with the specific workloads that they're leveraging in IaaS, or leverage the internet connection to be able to work with the platform services. Get them working with these workloads early and often, and then have those conversations around the ExpressRoute connectivity in parallel. Because what we tend to see is a lot of the folks that we're talking to in regards to these workloads, they don't necessarily talk to the network engineering team. So getting those guys engaged and be able to give them sound advice and proper guidance on how to architect their network to either get prepared to implement ExpressRoute, or how it's going to affect their internal network or network budget constraints that they may have. So having those conversations at the very onslaught is very important, and also engaging the customer's connectivity providers as well, because those like enterprise architects at those carriers will know from front to back what the customer's network is like and what would be needed to be able to incorporate this cloud connectivity. It's also recommended that we look at disaster recovery strategy, right? We mentioned the active pass that you're getting from ExpressRoute. How is the carrier going to interface with that? Do they support active? Do they support active passive? Looking at different geo locations, like East Coast, West Coast US, or in Europe or in Asia, depending on how the users are spread apart, what user data centers are leveraging, and what the workloads look like. And then network security. So we've got some good guidance from our product team members that actually implement ExpressRoute for MSIT. So they are looking at network security and leveraging DMZs, IDSs, web filters, firewalls, leveraging our network ISV community for different security products like Barracuda, Fortinet, Checkpoint, and we highlight a lot of those on our Azure Networking Fridays calls. A lot of these guys are really starting to see a lot of traction within the network security space within Azure, and a lot of them have incorporated their offerings, which customers are accustomed to using on-prem, into the Azure marketplace. Global connectivity, optimal networking, making sure that we're not running into tromboning effects. Proper performance, sizing the circuits in an appropriate way based on what the workloads are, and of course requirements for potentially the premium add-on if it's a global based customer that has resources in multiple data center regions globally is very important. And back to Office 365 for a quick minute. We kind of beat this dead horse in terms of the planning for deployment, and we'll share the links on step-by-step process and what to look at. But it's not just about routing. So even though ExpressRoute is a private path to the Microsoft Cloud, you need to look at what the application level deployments are looking at. So, like for instance, for Office 365, there's examples of how customers have their proxies set up, whether there's pack file configurations on the Outlook clients that need to be modified, how they're integrated with Exchange Online protection, or maybe third-party services like a Postini or something like that. How does all that traffic map within their network and to the Office 365 service, and then how does that introduction of a private path affect that? And the same thing would go for things like Power BI or big data solutions within Azure and interacting with applications on-prem, and how does that traffic map, and what are the private connections? How does that maybe change strategy, or maybe they need to look at how they have things architected from a security perspective. All those things are at play. So I highly encourage to kind of go through it granularly to ensure that the customer is put in a position to be successful. So let's talk about kind of the issues, right, and what we're seeing, and a little bit of the opportunity for our partners. So, like I mentioned before, if you don't have a world-class network, you don't really necessarily have a world-class cloud, right? So having customers be able to, connect in using high throughput, reliable connections, leveraging, security solutions that they're familiar with to really make the public cloud, seem like their own, private cloud instance on-prem. So in kind of building up this ecosystem as a whole, we're really enabling customers to be able to take advantage of what the public cloud has to offer. So the market opportunity that we're seeing today, and we've got some internal statistics that show that, when customers are looking at public cloud offerings, the network, really helps grow that. So as you're looking at maybe a specific workload, and, perhaps a customer might have in the back of their mind another type of workload that might have some high throughput or reliability requirements, the networking side of it can certainly bridge that gap to kind of open up different opportunities within accounts, which would in turn, allow you guys to get more consulting hours to be able to help, formulate a connectivity strategy, and also, get those workloads off the ground within those customer locations. And some of the scenarios that we see are around, storage, dev test, of course. I mentioned some scenarios around, BI and big data, SQL, Azure, Hadoop. We got this big push on open source software, so it kind of opens up all these new scenarios that people don't necessarily associate Microsoft with. So all these things need, first-class connectivity, high bandwidth, reliable connections, and that's what ExpressRoute is going to give you. A couple other scenarios around like media, especially around the high performance requirements there, and the hybrid applications, being able to have data transfers go back and forth that might have time sensitivities to them, where they need to be transferred and transacted in a certain time frame. That's where ExpressRoute can certainly help as well. So in summary, we've got a couple.
Jamie.
Yep. Go ahead, Parker.
Hey, this is Willie. I just wanted to jump in with a quick question for you.
Yeah, sure.
For the public peering, I think you might have mentioned that one of the questions that came in, you may have mentioned that the path is unidirectional, customer to Azure.
Yes.
Does this mean if we have a web service and web apps that needs to talk to an internal database server, that we still need to expose that database to public internet, even though we have ExpressRoute with the public peering enabled?
That's correct. Yeah, so
thank you.
In that scenario, the web service will be able to communicate, over the internet, to the customer's premise. Because if that traffic needs to get initiated, we don't do that in the Azure public side. That's something that we have that unidirectional traffic, as you mentioned. So yeah, that would be a requirement.
Okay, and we have one additional question. For ExpressRoute Premium to use the global Azure backbone for connectivity,
Yep.
What type of bandwidth would a customer get? For example, if a customer has 1 gig set up at their local US Azure ExpressRoute circuit, what would the bandwidth look like for piggybacking on the Azure backbone to access, say, the Azure European data centers?
Yeah, so that's limited by the gateway size. So depending on let's say you've got a 1 gig ExpressRoute circuit, but you've got the ultra performance gateway, which could go up to 10 gig. Then that traffic going from the VNet in the US, for example, to the VNet in Europe would be able to go up to 10 gig.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yep. So just wrapping things up real quick. In summary, ExpressRoute is that private connectivity option to the Microsoft Cloud. We have an ever-growing partner ecosystem, and we're looking to grow that partner ecosystem in the SI landscape as well, not just from the connectivity side. We've got support for all our national cloud environments. As new locations come on board, both from a data center or data center region perspective, we will have an ExpressRoute circuit in the general vicinity of that data center region. We tend to try to have our ExpressRoute locations within 5 milliseconds of a data center. In some cases, they're outside of that, depending on metropolitan areas and different customer locations that might coalesce around a given location. But generally, the rule of thumb is to have our ExpressRoute locations within 5 milliseconds of a data center region. It's got built-in redundancy, which is different than some of the other cloud providers out there. We have it all built in because we build production class cloud resources, and the network is falls in line with that philosophy. And we want to make sure that customers have a good sense of peace when implementing services within the Microsoft Cloud and not having to worry about their connections going down. And planning. Planning is the biggest thing, and that's the biggest opportunity for the SI community is helping with the planning, ensuring that the workloads map up with what their connectivity requirements are, and ensuring that the customer has a successful implementation the first time, so they'll continue to grow and leverage resources in the future. So here are some resources that we have, and I'll post some other ones that on the Yammer page. But we've got our extensive documentation page, which just got revamped not too long ago. We've got the pricing details that are out there. That's all for all customers, both from a metered and unlimited perspective. Details on the SLA for availability. The Azure Networking Fridays calls, which we're on holiday hiatus right now, but we're going to be coming back in January with new partners coming to the show and new topics to discuss around not just ExpressRoute but really the entire Azure networking ecosystem. So that's really what we're all about here, is enabling customers, partners of all shapes and sizes to be able to take advantage of what there is to offer from an Azure networking perspective. One thing that I'd like to maybe end my portion of the call with is we are looking to do a set of in-person ExpressRoute training for folks that are willing to come out to Redmond and interface directly with our ExpressRoute engineering team. As part of this call and something that we'll also post on the Yammer page, I put together a little survey to have you input your information to see if we could get you a spot at this future training. We don't necessarily have a timeline for it yet. It's definitely going to be after the first of the year, but we've got the funding to be able to host another one of those in Redmond. So it's probably going to be a 2 or 3 day event. So if you've got consultants that have a background in wide area networking, or have a CCNA or a CCIE, or maybe they have one but it's expired, someone that has core networking fundamentals, that's someone who we definitely would want to target. This would not be designed for networking 101. So having an experienced professional that has been around the networking space, especially the wide area networking space, and working with things like MPLS and BGP is someone who would definitely want to attend. So with that, I'll hand it back and see if there's any questions.
Jamie, thank you for that. There are no questions at the moment. I'll give people a minute or two if they have any, but I did post that survey in the messages tab, so people on this call do get a first glance at that if they would like to take advantage of that opportunity. But we obviously will be sure to post that in the Yammer group as well, like you mentioned. If no one has any other questions, I'll give you guys back a few minutes of your time. Thank you again for joining us, and we will be posting these slides and this recording to our Yammer group in addition to our YouTube channel as well in the next few days. So be on the lookout for that if you want to go back over anything as well. But with that, thank you guys so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.